Yuya was in so much pain that he couldn't see by the time the ritual ended and he was hauled back to his chambers, hidden from any non-inner priests by the cover of night and the darkness and emptiness of the back halls. The inner priests dumped him unceremoniously to the floor. "Finish up," one of them snapped at Dennis, his feet scrabbling to jump up from his seat. The door slammed closed, and distantly, Yuya heard the lock click. Dennis's cool hands alighted tentatively on his shoulders then. Yuya could almost see that face he was making, the way he always bit his lip so hard that it almost bled, his face white and his eyes distant. "Bastards," Dennis mumbled, quiet enough so that no one at the door could hear him. "They bled you for 5 hours." Yuya shuddered, feeling his blood stain into the carpet underneath him. At least it was red. 5 hours. That was a lot longer than they normally drained him. No wonder he felt so horribly dizzy. "They must need a lot of blood after the rebellion," he said faintly, his voice quiet even to himself. "Shh," Dennis said. "Don't talk." He hesitated before he carefully eased his hands under Yuya's arms, gently helping him to sit up. Yuya could barely see, and he was so weak that even the other 3 in his head couldn't gather themselves enough to speak. "Easy now," Dennis said. Yuya had to lean completely against Dennis as Dennis helped him up and guided him to a stool. Yuya slumped as soon as Dennis released him, feeling a pang of guilt at the blood he had left behind on Dennis's shirt. Dennis could get in trouble for having dirty clothes. "Yuya," Yuto whispered at the back of his head. "Breathe." Yuya realized then that he had been holding his breath, and he let his air out in a rush, twinging with pain. It wasn't over yet, either. The wounds had to be re-scarred so that the power of the runes would remain intact, so that Yuya would be forced to obey the priest's commands. It was a painful process that Roger had started making Dennis do after the rituals were over. Even if Dennis was gentle, the act of having ashes rubbed into his wounds was always horrible. He swallowed as he dug his hands into his knees, waiting for the stinging pain with his teeth dug into his lip to suppress any cries. He flinched a little when Dennis's cool hands touched his back again and... Wait, he was just bandaging his wounds. What about the scarring? "Dennis?" Yuya said. "Shh," Dennis said, and Yuya fell silent, his brain spinning. Dennis tapped Yuya to lift his arms so that he could wrap the bandage around his torso, slowly and carefully wrapping him up. "What's he doing?" Yugo said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Shut up, you imbecile," Yuri hissed. "Just wait. Dennis isn't stupid." Dennis finished wrapping the bandages up and over Yuya's shoulders, then had him hold his arm out so he could wrap the cuts all down his arms. "Dennis, what are you doing?" Yuya said again. If you don't scar these, the runes will weaken by tomorrow, and Roger will beat you again." "They won't have time to find out," Dennis said, not meeting Yuya's eyes. "What?" Dennis finished bandaging Yuya's other arm without responding to any more of Yuya's questions, and Yuya finally just had to fall silent, waiting uncertainly. Yugo started chattering again, asking questions about what was happening despite Yuto and Yuri trying to shush him. Dennis got back up and walked across the room to get Yuya's robe. He helped Yuya put it on, as Yuya's arms were stiff and painful to move from the cuts. As Dennis finished tugging the sleeve over Yuya's wrist, he pressed something into Yuya's palm. "Don't look, just hide it in your sash," Dennis hissed, low and right against Yuya's ear, as though worried that somehow someone would hear them. "What?" "It's a smoke pill." Yuya felt the color drain out of his face. Smoke pills were an incredibly expensive, incredibly illegal drug. It supposedly gave an incredible high and made the entire world look different. But more importantly, smoke pills didn't just mess with your head. They messed with the heads of everyone around you. Swallow a smoke pill, and you would start to release a certain combination of pheromones and altered aura that would bend attention around you. making you effectively invisible. They were illegal because of how dangerous they were. Thieves, assassins, and rebels could make use of them too easily. Where did you— Not important, Dennis said, but the way he averted his eyes from Yuya's made Yuya think he had to do something unsavory to get a hold of it. Idiot, Yuri hissed at the back of Yuya's mind, but even Yuya could hear the faint crack in Yuri's voice. But what? Tomorrow is the solstice, Dennis said. You'll be out of the temple. It's a once-in-a-year opportunity. Surrounded by priests and festival visitors, Yuya pointed out. I think they'll notice if I try to swallow a smoke pill. Dennis just shrugged, still not meeting Yuya's eyes. Maybe there will be a commotion you can take advantage of. He turned away, making a show of tugging at the bedclothes as though to straighten them, even though they didn't need any straightening. Yuya staggered to his feet, taking a wobbly step forward. Dennis, he said. Dennis wouldn't look at him. You never belonged here, he said, his voice cracking slightly. You're too— He didn't finish what he was going to say. I don't care what you decide to do when you get out there. Just go. Get as far away from here as you can. Yuya's heart leaped and he stepped forward again, fingers grasping at the hem of Dennis's shirt. Dennis! For just a second, Dennis still wouldn't look at him. Then he turned with a snap, facing Yuya. His hand twitched briefly. Fingers brushed the side of Yuya's face as though he wanted to cup it, but he didn't. He half smiled. You look just like him, he mumbled. I couldn't save him. I was too much of a coward. I still am. Yuri rumbled softly, and Yuya felt his own heart clench up. Dennis's hand fell away, and Yuya grabbed for it, holding it tightly between his own hands. He's still here, he said, his voice cracking desperately. Yuri's still here. He doesn't want you to do anything that would get you hurt. Dennis slipped his hand free of Yuya's grip. I know, he said. And he just smiled then, a crooked thing that didn't reach his sad eyes. That's why I have to get you both out of here. Yuya grabbed for Dennis's hand again, but Dennis was faster than he was, and Yuya was still weak from the blood loss. Yuya, Yuri said, his voice actually shaking. Yuya, stop him. Yuya's heart was in his throat, and he made a wild swipe for Dennis once more. Dennis slipped around Yuya and went for the door, unlocking it with the key around his neck and slipping through. Yuya stumbled across the carpet, but the door fell shut before he could reach it. He fell against it, hands pressed against the wood. Dennis, he said. Dennis, please, Dennis. His voice cracked, his heart clenched up. He couldn't breathe. Dennis wasn't— What was he going to do? What could he do to make a commotion big enough to distract the priests from him? He'd be caught. He'd be caught and Roger would hurt him worse than usual. Dennis could die. Yuya slid down against the door, his forehead pressed against it. Tears choked his eyes and he couldn't breathe, couldn't hear for the pulsing in his ears. What was Dennis going to do? Could he actually escape? He found his eyes sliding over to the fireplace, and for a moment he felt he could see an after-image of that flower, the one that Dennis had brought him despite the danger, just to make him smile. He couldn't escape. Not without Dennis. He couldn't go without Dennis. Not without you, Yuya thought, squeezing back the tears. Dennis, please. You don't belong here either. At the back of his mind, Yuri let out a low, broken keen. Dennis would not meet his eyes when the priests came for him. Priest Phoenix swept a low bow, standing respectfully back from the door. Yuya kept his eyes on the ground and tried to keep his mind blank. Roger had ordered him to remain as emotionless as possible around Phoenix. My lord, Phoenix said, his voice full of actual reverence. Yuya tried not to wince. He felt guilty. Edo Phoenix was never present for the rituals, and Roger didn't seem to like him. Yuya thought that maybe he didn't know. Maybe he didn't know that Yuya was a tool and not a king. Yuya felt somehow like he was betraying him. I'm not a god. I'm sorry. He just nodded in response to Priest Phoenix, keeping his face lax and passive. Phoenix was attended by the twins. Grace and Gloria Tyler, he thought they were called. The silver-haired one always watched Yuya with shining eyes rivaling Phoenix's reverence. The gold-haired one rarely looked at Yuya at all. Both of them tended to have quiet thoughts, though, with only rare bursts of destructive thinking, so he didn't mind them. Roger stood behind Edo with his own 2 attendants. He tended to have different ones all the time. Roger didn't like keeping anyone too close to him. Today, it was a tall, broad man with an eye patch, and a slender woman with limp, blonde hair. Kill, 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 kill. Yuya bit back on his wince. It was her. The fake priestess, Yuri called her. She had joined the temple about a year ago and was already promoted to the priesthood. She wasn't here out of any form of reverence, though. She wanted to kill Yuya. It was the only thought on her mind any time she was anywhere near him. I wonder what I did that makes her hate me so much. He looked at the floor briefly. I wish she actually could kill me. It was a little odd that Roger was being attended by an outer priest, but Yuya was more concerned with Dennis, standing at attention beside Roger. Yuya could feel the pill digging into his chest through his sash. When the distraction comes, use it, Yuri hissed at him. If you don't, if you waste his sacrifice, I won't do that, Yuya thought quietly back at him. For a moment, his mind was silent. I'm sorry, Yuto whispered. Yuto didn't know Dennis, not the way that Yuya and Yuri did. He had never gotten to live with Dennis. Yugo hadn't either. He was being uncharacteristically quiet today, come to think of it. Yuya poked gently in Yugo's mental direction as he fell into step with his priests surrounding him, walking down the corridors of the temple towards the doors. Only once a year did Yuya get to step outside the gates of the palace, and that was on the solstice. Yugo, he whispered, the doors opening before him. Yugo made a faint coughing sound, but he didn't respond. He's just happy we're leaving, Yuri said, his voice cutting. Hey, Yugo said, don't put words on my tongue. You mean put words in my mouth. Don't do that either. Guys, Yuto said, please. Yugo grumbled softly, and for a moment, everyone was quiet. I'm sorry, Yugo said after a beat. I'm sad too. I don't want Dennis to get hurt either, but I want to get out. I want to go look for Rin before we... He fell briefly silent, and Yuya felt his stomach twist a bit. Rin. The girl that Yugo had known before they all became... this. Yuya dreamed about her a lot because of Yugo's memories entwined with his. She seemed like a nice girl. He knew Yugo missed her a lot. I didn't want to say anything and be disconsiderate. You mean inconsiderate, said Yuri. I know what I said, and so do you. The twin priestesses moved ahead of them on the path, and Yuya came back to himself. The twins pulled on opposite sides of the gate, heaving the iron lattice open. Yuya swallowed thickly. Outside, the solstice festivities had already begun. The square that had once hosted an impromptu execution had since been immaculately cleaned. Not a speck of blood remained. It was still red, though, from all the red drapery in all of the booths and tents that lined the square, and flags that hung from the windows of nearby houses. Already the square was full. Red-robed priests and acolytes in their short brown coats scurried about, checking tents, fixing drapery, setting up the visiting nobles from other towns in their sections, herding guests to their appropriate locations. There were regular people, too, wrapped in an array of clothing, from the shabby to the fine. Some of them had shining faces, eyes that shone with awe when they saw Yuya and his priests exiting the temple at the sound of the bells ringing. More of them were sullen, though, dark, with barely concealed rage, or flinching with flashing terror in huge eyes. He could hear their thoughts like a murmur running through the otherwise mostly quiet square, an incoherent mess of, I want to rip him to pieces, kill him, he should die. Yuya tried not to look at any of them. He was hurting all of them, regardless of if they believed he was a god or not. A large stage had been erected at the end of the square. The priests cleared the way, moving the crowds aside so that Yuya had a clear shot to the stage. He walked slowly. He still hurt a little, even though his scars had mostly sealed over. He had to focus to keep his mind blank too, so that Phoenix's empathy couldn't pick up on him. Then again, they were surrounded by people, and judging from Phoenix's pale face, he was picking up on everyone's emotions at once, not just the destructive thoughts like Yuya did. That was probably going to make it harder for him to zero in on Yuya's. That could be an advantage. When he swallowed the smoke pill, Phoenix wouldn't be able to sense him as easily. He swallowed thickly. Was he really doing this? What would he do after he ran? Where would he go? To the goddess's champion, he thought. And then, but where is she? How do I find her? How do I get out of the city? He reached the stage. His priests swept to the side, bowing on either side of the stairs. After a breath, Yuya took the first step, and then the next. He tried to still his breathing and hide how stiff his arms were as he reached the top. A large black throne had been erected at the top, with a huge red canopy over it. This was where he was supposed to sit and watch the day's festivities, performances, and rituals and the like. People would come and leave offerings for him, and Rajay would pretend to interpret Yuya's silence into proclamations on what the offerings would result in. That was what was supposed to happen anyway. Yuya settled onto the throne, and his priests ascended the steps after him. Phoenix took up the space to his left, and Rajay to his right. Edo's twin priestesses fell silently back behind him, and Rajay's attending priests fell behind him. Dennis was nowhere to be seen. Of course, he wasn't supposed to be. He was Rajay's servant, not a priest or an acolyte. He technically didn't have a place up here. So, where was he? How will I know the signal? People of Zarkania, Rajay called out, his voice vibrating over the crowd. The soft buzz of the people faded to silence. Yuya's thoughts turned away from Dennis abruptly to the crowd. Everyone stared right at him. Eyes of reverence, anger, fear, sadness, hate. His stomach twisted. He wanted to be allowed to cry. The solstice rises, Phoenix said, picking up where Rajay left off, the shortest day of the year. It is the day of shadows from which our Lord arises, Rajay said. And it marks the 6 months leading to the final eclipse, and the final awakening of our God. If any among you has any fear in their hearts, dispel it, Phoenix said, his voice vibrating with reverence that made Yuya want to duck his head. He had been ordered to remain silent and still, though, so he trained his eyes forward and tightened his hands on his knees. Our God is one of destruction, but he should not be feared. He should be welcomed and praised. When the darkness falls over the land, our Lord will rise and smite the impurities from this world, Rajay continued. A faint rumble growled over the top of the crowd, causing Rajay to fumble on his words. The man squinted, looking confused. Yuya tried to follow his gaze without moving his head too much. It looked like he was staring at one of the tents near the end of the square, close to the temple. The curtains were drawn on this one, and only this one, but they fluttered softly. Yuya's heart skipped a beat. And then the tent exploded. Screams rang out over the square as fire blossomed from inside the tent, sending out shards of wood and actual fireballs in the rain over the end of the square. The crowd scattered, shrieks echoing around the chaos. Sparklers and fizzes shot out from inside the tent. Fireworks? But the fire was so high, billowing up like a horrible pillar towards the sky, higher than even the temple walls. That was the goddamn alcohol, Rajay was shouting. Don't use water, you imbeciles! That was the alcohol tent! Dennis, Yuya thought, stumbling to his feet, his mind conjuring image of Dennis burnt and mangled from his explosion. Oh, demons, Dennis! Yuya, Yuri roared, startling Yuya a few steps forward. Yuya, go! Red fabric whistled around him as Phoenix threw himself in front of Yuya and the suddenly surging crowd. His arms held out as though to block any sparks from Yuya with his own robes. Yuya felt a faint pang of guilt again. Then he dove his hand into his sash and dug the smoke pill free. He shoved it between his teeth, forcing it down his throat, and the world grew hazy all of a sudden. Everyone seemed to be moving slower? Maybe it was just his imagination, but everything seemed to leave a vague afterimage as it moved, that followed moving things in a trail. In that strange, almost slow motion, he saw Phoenix's head turn towards him, saw his eyes widen, arms drop as his head whipped from side to side. "The Emperor," he choked. "The Emperor is gone!" Yuya was invisible. Yuya ducked his head down and bolted. For a few seconds, his body resisted the movement. His runes were telling him to do as he was told, to stay put. But they hadn't been properly scarred. The connection wasn't strong enough. Yuya broke through that final resistance and leaped from the stage without taking the stairs. His ankles screamed as he hit the ground, and then the world in front of him was a mass of bodies, swinging fabrics, screams, fire and sparks raining from the sky. There was a fallen cloak on the ground near the stage. Yuya grabbed it, swinging it over his head and ducking his face under the hood. He didn't know how long a smoke pill lasted. He needed to hide his face. People yelped and screamed as he lurched through the crowd, ricocheting off of bodies and hitting the ground more than once. His arms screamed from where the stones had scraped them and reopened to scars. He stumbled back to his feet, tripping again over a loose cobblestone. I should go to the tent. Make sure Dennis is okay. You don't have time, Yuri screamed in his ear. Go! He fucking sacrificed himself for this. Don't you dare fucking waste it. Yuya, go straight. There's an alley that way, Yuto shouted. Run faster, Yuya. The smoke pill might wear off, Yugo said. A coiled scream lodged in Yuya's throat. But Dennis... Letting out a strangled cry, Yuya bolted for the opening Yuto had pointed out. He tripped over a foot but managed to catch himself and keep running, diving into the darkness of the alley and vanishing into the bowels of the city. He was free.